In 1243, on a battlefield in eastern Anatolia, the Mongols delivered a crushing victory that seemed to settle the future of an entire region. They defeated the Sultanate of Rum, the most powerful Turkic state of its time, with precision, discipline, and overwhelming force. To the Mongols, this was just another step in a larger strategy: eliminate potential rivals, secure control, and ensure no rising power could challenge them again. It looked like a decisive ending. But history rarely ends where we think it does. 2 centuries later, in 1453, a different empire, born from the same lands the Mongols once shattered, would capture Constantinople and bring an end to the Byzantine Empire. That empire, the Ottomans, would go on to dominate 3 continents for over 600 years, shaping the course of global history in ways few could have predicted. Here's the paradox. In trying to destroy Turkic power, the Mongols may have unintentionally created the conditions for the most powerful Turkic empire in history to rise. How does a military victory lead to the exact opposite of its intended outcome? How does destruction become the foundation for creation? And more importantly, what does this tell us about the decisions we make today, in business, in strategy, and in life? Before we dive in, I'm curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. To understand how everything changed, you have to go back long before the Mongols ever appeared on the horizon, back to a moment that quietly reshaped the future of an entire region. In 1071, the Byzantine Empire, once the dominant power of the Eastern Mediterranean, suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Manzikert. Their opponent wasn't just another rival kingdom. It was the Seljuk Turks, a rising force from the Central Asian steppes. That single battle didn't just shift borders. It opened the gates of Anatolia, what is now modern-day Turkey, to an entirely new civilization. But this wasn't a typical invasion. It wasn't just armies marching in and taking control. It was something far more transformative, a migration. The Turkic peoples didn't arrive alone as soldiers. They came as entire communities. Families, leaders, scholars, and craftsmen moved westward, bringing with them their language, beliefs, and way of life. Over time, they didn't just conquer the land, they reshaped it. By 1077, they had established what became known as the Sultanate of Rum. The name Rum itself is revealing. It means Rome, a reference to the Eastern Roman or Byzantine lands they had taken over. But what's fascinating is that the Seljuks didn't simply erase what came before them. Instead, they adapted. At its peak in the 12th and early 13th centuries, the Sultanate of Rum was more than just a military power. It became a thriving center of trade, culture, and learning. Imagine a network of caravan routes stretching across Asia, connecting merchants from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. Along these routes, the Seljuks built caravanserais, roadside inns that provided safety and support for traders, fueling economic growth and regional stability. Cities like Konya emerged as intellectual hubs, where scholars studied astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The culture that developed wasn't purely Turkic. It was something more sophisticated, a fusion. The ruling elite of the Sultanate adopted many elements of Persian culture, which at the time represented a highly developed tradition of governance, literature, and art. Persian became the language of administration and high culture. Architecture, poetry, and court life reflected deep Persian influence. This blending of Turkic strength and Persian refinement created what historians call a Turco-Persian synthesis, a hybrid civilization that was both powerful and culturally rich. And there's an important lesson here, especially if you think in terms of strategy or business. The Seljuks understood that raw power alone isn't enough to sustain control. To govern a complex, established society, you have to learn from it, integrate with it, and build on what already works. They didn't just conquer Anatolia, they optimized it. By the early 1200s, the Sultanate of Rum stood as one of the most advanced and stable states in the region. It had strong institutions, a growing economy, and a unique cultural identity that blended multiple worlds into one. From the outside, it looked resilient, like a system that could endure for generations. But history has a way of testing even the strongest systems. Because while Rum was reaching its peak, A new force was rising in the east, one that didn't just challenge existing structures, but had the power to erase them entirely. And when that force arrived, everything the civilization had built would be put to the ultimate test. While the Sultanate of Rum was reaching its peak, far to the east, a force was emerging that would redefine what power even meant. In 1206, a man named Temujin united the fractured Mongol tribes and took the name Genghis Khan. What followed wasn't just expansion, it was a complete reimagining of warfare, organization, and speed. Within a single generation, the Mongols would build the largest contiguous land empire in history, not through sheer numbers, but through discipline, coordination, and a level of strategic clarity that most of their enemies simply couldn't match. Their first major shockwave hit the Khwarezmian Empire between 1219 and 1221. This wasn't a conventional conquest, it was annihilation. Cities like Bokhara, Samarkand, and Merv were devastated. Millions died. But beyond the destruction, the Mongols were sending a message. Resistance wasn't just risky, it was existential. You either submitted or you disappeared. By the early 1230s, the Mongols had pushed deep into Persia and were now on the doorstep of Anatolia. The Sultanate of Rum understood the stakes. Facing an enemy they couldn't defeat head-on, they chose a pragmatic strategy. In 1236, Sultan Kaikabad I accepted Mongol overlordship, agreeing to pay tribute in exchange for relative autonomy. From a strategic standpoint, it made sense. Preserve your system, keep your people safe, and wait for a better moment. And for a while it worked. But then came a turning point, one that feels surprisingly familiar if you've ever seen a leader misread a shifting landscape. In 1241, the great Khan Ogidi died, triggering a temporary succession crisis within the Mongol Empire. To Sultan Kaikhosro II, this looked like an opportunity. He assumed the Mongols were distracted, weakened, and unable to respond effectively. So he made a bold move. He stopped paying tribute. It was a critical miscalculation. What he underestimated was the resilience of the Mongol system. Even in moments of internal instability, their military machine remained highly functional. More importantly, the Mongols couldn't afford to let rebellion go unpunished. If one vassal broke free without consequences, others would follow. So they responded swiftly and decisively. In 1243, the two forces met at the Battle of Koz Dag. On paper, the Sultanate of Rum had every advantage. Their army numbered around 80,000, bolstered by allies from Trebizond, Aleppo, and even European mercenaries. The Mongols, under General Baiju, had roughly 30,000 troops. But numbers weren't the real metric that mattered. The Mongol army operated like a system, precise, disciplined, and deeply trained. Every movement had been practiced, every tactic refined. The forces of Rum, by contrast, lacked cohesion. They were a coalition, not a unified machine. As the battle unfolded, the Mongols deployed one of their most effective tactics, the feigned retreat. They pulled back just enough to create the illusion of weakness. The Rum forces took the bait, breaking formation to pursue what they thought was a fleeing enemy. And in that moment, the Mongols turned, unleashing a coordinated counterattack with relentless volleys of arrows. Panic spread. Discipline collapsed. By nightfall, the army of Rum abandoned the field entirely. Even the Sultan fled, fearing betrayal within his own ranks. The result wasn't just a defeat, it was systemic collapse. In the aftermath, the Sultanate of Rum became little more than a puppet state. The tribute imposed by the Mongols was enormous. Millions in silver, goods, and livestock, draining its resources year after year. Mongol officials oversaw governance, ensuring compliance. And when the Sultan died, internal power struggles fractured what little unity remained. This is where things get interesting. The Mongols didn't replace the system they destroyed with a strong alternative. Anatolia wasn't a priority, it was a peripheral region in a massive empire. As long as taxes flowed and no single power grew too strong, they were satisfied. But that approach came with unintended consequences. Without a strong central authority, the region began to fragment. Local leaders, known as beys, started carving out their own territories. These small principalities, or beyliks, competed, fought, and survived in a landscape defined by instability. From the outside, it looked like chaos. And it was. But beneath that chaos, something else was happening. The old system had been shattered, but in its place, a new kind of environment was emerging, one filled with opportunity for anyone who understood how to navigate it. The Mongols had delivered a decisive blow. They had achieved their objective. But in doing so, they had fundamentally altered the structure of the region in ways they didn't fully anticipate. And in that fractured, unpredictable landscape, the stage was being set for something entirely new to rise. Out of the chaos the Mongols left behind, something unexpected began to take shape, not in the centers of power, but on the edges of it. Around 1258, in a small and largely unremarkable village in northwestern Anatolia, a boy was born. His name was Osman. At the time, there was nothing to suggest that his story would matter, let alone change the course of history. His father, Ertugrul, led a modest Turkic tribe, one of many that had been pushed westward by the instability sweeping the region. They weren't powerful. They weren't wealthy. They were simply surviving. But in complex systems, success doesn't always start with strength. Sometimes, it starts with position. Osman inherited a small frontier territory, a beylik that was insignificant compared to the larger powers of the time. Yet its location was everything. It sat in northwestern Anatolia, far enough from the Mongol-controlled east to avoid constant interference, but close to the weakening Byzantine Empire in the west. This wasn't just a borderland, it was an opportunity zone. A place where pressure from one side and weakness on the other created a rare strategic opening. At the same time, something else was happening. As the Mongols devastated Central Asia and Persia, waves of people began moving west. These weren't just refugees in the modern sense. Among them were experienced warriors, skilled craftsmen, administrators, scholars, people who had lived and worked in structured, sophisticated states before everything collapsed. They carried knowledge, discipline, and ambition, and they needed a place to go. Most regions in Anatolia were unstable, fragmented, or locked in constant conflict. But Osman's territory offered something different. It was relatively secure, positioned on the frontier, and most importantly, it provided a clear direction for expansion into Byzantine lands. For many of these migrants, especially the Ghazi warriors who saw fighting on the frontier as both a duty and an opportunity, this was exactly what they were looking for. Osman didn't build his power by accident. He understood what he had. Not in a grand, theoretical sense, but in a practical one. He recognized that his strength wasn't in size, but in alignment, aligning people, purpose, and geography. He wasn't known as a brilliant battlefield commander in the traditional sense. Instead, his advantage was consistency. Rather than chasing large, risky battles, he expanded slowly, targeting smaller Byzantine fortresses one by one. Each victory added territory, resources, and credibility. Over time, this created momentum. Equally important was his ability to organize. Osman began transforming a loose collection of tribal fighters into something more structured. Systems of governance emerged, basic taxation, legal frameworks, and administrative roles. It wasn't an empire yet, but it was becoming a functioning state. And then there was something many leaders overlook: how he treated people. Osman developed a reputation for fairness, not just toward fellow Muslims, but also toward Christians living in the territories he absorbed. In a time of instability and fear, that mattered. Byzantine officials and local populations, seeing the decline of their own empire, often chose to submit rather than resist. And when they did, they were integrated rather than destroyed. That decision compounded over time, turning former enemies into contributors. By 1299, Osman made a move that was more symbolic than territorial, but far more important. He declared independence. No longer would his domain operate in the shadow of the collapsing Sultanate of Rum or under the distant authority of the Mongols. In Friday sermons, his name was spoken as the sovereign ruler. It was a clear signal. This was no longer just a frontier outpost. It was a state. That moment is often marked as the birth of the Ottoman Empire. At the time, it was still small, easy to overlook, easy to underestimate. But the foundation had been set. In the years that followed, Osman and his successors would continue expanding, building on the same principles: strategic positioning, steady growth, and the ability to attract and integrate talent. What makes this moment so powerful is the contrast. The Mongols had shattered a centralized system, leaving behind fragmentation and uncertainty. And yet, within that exact environment, Osman identified structure where others saw only chaos. This is the turning point of the story, the moment where destruction begins to transform into creation. To really understand why the Ottomans emerged from this chaos, you have to shift your perspective. This isn't just a story about battles or leaders, it's about systems. The Mongols didn't set out to create a new empire in Anatolia. In fact, they were trying to prevent exactly that. But the outcome they produced was shaped by a series of decisions that made sense in the short term and proved transformative in the long term. Start with the most important factor. The Mongols were exceptionally good at destruction, but far less interested in reconstruction. When they defeated the Sultanate of Rum, they dismantled its centralized authority, stripped it of resources, and reduced it to a dependent, fragmented structure. But they didn't replace it with a strong governing system of their own. Anatolia wasn't a core priority, it was a peripheral zone in a vast empire. As long as tribute was paid and no single rival grew too powerful, the Mongols were satisfied. That decision created a classic power vacuum. In any complex system, when a dominant structure collapses and no stable replacement emerges, the space doesn't stay empty. It gets filled, often by smaller, more adaptive players. In Anatolia, that meant the rise of dozens of beyliks, each competing for survival and influence. Most of them were unstable, constantly fighting, lacking long-term vision. But the environment itself, fragmented, unpredictable, fluid, became the perfect testing ground for something new. At the same time, the Mongol invasions triggered a massive westward migration. And this is where things get even more interesting. The people moving into Anatolia weren't just displaced peasants. Many were highly capable individuals, battle-hardened warriors, experienced administrators, skilled craftsmen, scholars who had been part of sophisticated states in Central Asia and Persia. They brought with them not just labor, but knowledge, how to organize armies, manage taxation, run courts, and build institutions. In modern terms, it was a talent influx. And like any system that suddenly gains access to high-level talent, the regions that could attract and organize these people gained a massive advantage. Osman's Beylik happened to be one of those places. Not because it was the richest or most powerful, but because it offered alignment, a clear mission, a stable base, and room to grow. Then there's the external environment. The Byzantine Empire, which had once dominated the region, was no longer a serious counterbalance. After the Fourth Crusade in 1204, when Constantinople was sacked by Western Crusaders, Byzantium never fully recovered. Internal conflicts, economic decline, and territorial losses weakened its ability to defend its borders. By the time Osman began expanding, Byzantium was vulnerable, still significant, but no longer dominant. This created an asymmetry. To the east, the Mongols discouraged expansion. To the west, Byzantium couldn't effectively resist it. So naturally, expansion flowed westward. But strategy alone doesn't explain momentum. There was also ideology. The early Ottomans built their identity around the concept of the Ghazi, the warrior fighting for a cause, in this case, the expansion of Islam. This wasn't just propaganda, it was a powerful organizing principle. It gave people a reason to join, a sense of purpose that went beyond survival or profit. In a fragmented world, that kind of clarity is rare and incredibly valuable. While other beyliks fought each other for short-term gains, the Ottomans focused outward. That focus unified their efforts, attracted more fighters, and created a reinforcing cycle of growth. When you step back, the pattern becomes clear. The Mongols optimized for a short-term objective: eliminate a potential rival and maintain control. They achieved that goal. But they didn't account for the secondary effects: what happens after a system is broken, where displaced talent goes, how neighboring powers respond, and which actors are best positioned to adapt. This is where system thinking matters. History isn't linear. It's a network of interconnected forces, where actions ripple outward in ways that are difficult to predict. The Mongols didn't directly create the Ottoman Empire, but by destroying a centralized state, triggering mass migration, failing to build a replacement structure, and reshaping the strategic landscape, they created the exact conditions that made the Ottomans possible. It's a powerful reminder, especially if you think like a builder, a founder, or a strategist. When you disrupt a system, you're not just removing what exists, you're shaping what comes next. When you step back and look at the full arc of this story, it stops being just about empires and starts becoming something much more personal. The Mongols did everything right by their own logic. They identified a threat, moved decisively, and eliminated it with overwhelming force. In the short term, it worked perfectly. But in the long term, their actions set off a chain reaction they couldn't control. That's the reality of complex systems, whether we're talking about history, business, or even your own life. You can make a smart decision today based on all the information you have and still create outcomes you never intended. Not because you were wrong, but because the system itself is too complex to fully predict. The Mongols destroyed a centralized power, but they didn't replace it with something stable. And that's where the real lesson begins. When you remove structure, you don't create emptiness, you create opportunity. The question is never whether a vacuum will be filled. It's who will fill it. Osman wasn't the strongest, the richest, or the most obvious candidate, but he understood his environment better than anyone else. He saw opportunity where others saw chaos. And in the right context, that made all the difference. History is full of these paradoxes. Victories that plant the seeds of future losses. Failures that open doors no one expected. And often, the biggest outcomes don't come from the biggest players, but from those who position themselves correctly when the system shifts. So here's something to think about. Have you ever made a decision that led to a completely unexpected result? Maybe something that felt like a setback at the time, but later turned into an opportunity? If that resonates with you, share your story in the comments. I read them all. And if you enjoy breaking down history not just as the past, but as a way to understand how the world really works, make sure to like, subscribe, and stick around. Because the next story might change the way you see everything.